Jennifer never seriously entertained the idea of going with me to sit across a table from Nathan. She and I both agreed that setting up a meeting like that could feel confrontational, or worse, come off feeling staged and phony. If I was going to get Nathan's actual story, I'd need to go there alone. But even if that weren't the case, Jennifer never would have made it inside the prison walls. Her fear was just too all-consuming. She couldn't stop fantasizing about reasons Nathan might still have to harm her. She told me that, for a while, the state had garnished his wages in prison and sent them to her as some kind of mandatory restitution. The amount was paltry, like a couple dollars a month, which, apart from everything else, just felt petty. She sent a letter telling them to cut it out. She didn't like the steady drip of monthly reminders about the kidnapping. Plus, it unsettled her to imagine Nathan in his cell, stewing with resentment, maybe even thinking of ways to exact revenge after he's paroled. Still, Jennifer was all for me going to see Nathan. But the more I thought about the story of the kidnapping, the more I realized how little I knew about him. Even though I'd spent a week interviewing Jennifer, and many more hours poring over news clippings, police reports, court records, and attorney letters, I really didn't know much beyond what flavor of Gatorade he likes and what brand of cigarettes he smokes. Jennifer had given me a vignette of what he looked like.
There was a cartoon character in the cartoon Deputy Dog, the guy with the really long face. He looked like that cartoon character with like just a droopy mouth and a droopy face and these big sad eyes. And he looked Hispanic to me. His skin was not light colored. It was kind of, Hispanic looking. And he had a chin strap beard, very carefully manicured face.
Which, again, sounded more like a cartoon or a caricature than a description of an actual person. And it turns out that even whether he was Hispanic was up for debate.
When I appeared at the sheriff's department to report what was going on, and I described Nathan, I said he looked Hispanic. And the police officer said, no, he was black. I said, well, he looked Hispanic to me. And again, he said, no, he was black. And what's interesting now is that one of the times that I checked where Nathan was in prison and what was described, he's described as white in the prison record.
Anyway, tracking down Nathan 12 years after the abduction seemed like a long shot, and the chances of him being open to talking with me seemed even more remote. But, as luck would have it, he did agree to meet with me, twice actually. He was remarkably candid in those conversations, but right off the bat, the thing that really stood out to me was what he told me about his mother. Just how much he loved her, how much he adored spending time with her.
Like, I'm a mama's boy. She was my world.
Nathan was so earnest when he told me this that it really startled me. Not because it's unusual to love your mother, obviously that's very normal, and not because I pigeonholed him as a hardened criminal who'd bottled up his emotions. The reason I was so surprised was because of the other details I learned about Nathan's mom. That she was a chaotic force in his life, and that her spiraling drug use had also pulled in Nathan. Were you using with your mom together every day?
Every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, every day. At that point, I was doing crack, and the week before I committed the robbery, I was using heroin for that week. But yeah, we were using every day with each other, enabling each other, even when the lights were out.
Actually, it was worse than that. It wasn't just the drug use. It was that she was the one who set the kidnapping in motion, who prodded Nathan in that week of March in 2012 to commit a burglary.
And at that point, My mom said either you're going to do something or I'm going to do something. I'm going to go rob another store. You're going to go do something. So
think of it this way. This story is what happens when your mom asks you to go on an armed crime spree in order to fetch drug money. Of course, there's more to Nathan's story than that. A lot more, actually. And when I really dug into it, something dawned on me. Nathan's story is about being desperately devoted to helping the people you love, and how the sacrifices you make can end up curdling into tragedy. In an eerie way, it was Jennifer's story, all over again. From Middlemarch Productions, I'm Tom Joudrey, and this is episode 2 of Passenger Seat. My hometown of Mansfield, Ohio, has a few very minor claims to fame. It's the birthplace of actor Luke Perry, for example, although, to be honest, people keep telling me who that is, and I keep forgetting. Then there's Malabar Farm, located southeast of Mansfield. The 900-acre estate was built in 1939 by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Louis Bromfield. Bromfield's close friend, Humphrey Bogart, lent the place some Hollywood prestige when he married Lauren Bacall there in 1945. Still, a showcase for mid-century farming techniques like contour plowing doesn't exactly put Mansfield on the map in the 21st century. To my mind, Mansfield's most fascinating artifact of history lies just off Route 30, a towering stone prison called the Ohio State Reformatory. It was built in 1886 in a Victorian Gothic style, but despite its imposing facade, it actually had an idealistic mandate. Instead of inflicting punishment on criminals, the goal would be to inspire repentance and reform their souls. Over the course of a century, that mandate would go largely unfulfilled, as conditions devolved into overcrowding, corruption, and abuse, leading to its court-ordered closure in 1990. Still, chances are you've actually seen the imposing facade and the guts of the building, because in 1994 it was repurposed as a set for what became one of the most iconic films of all time, The Shawshank Redemption. Today, the reformatory still attracts a lot of visitors. The tour showcases an actual electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, that was used to kill 315 death row prisoners. The most astonishing visual spectacle is a 6-tier block of 600 freestanding cells on the east wing. The tour also takes you inside a cavernous chapel that once fit 1,000 inmates for Sunday services. Here's the thing I want to point out. When you approach the chapel's north wall, you'll see signs that emphatically forbid photography. If you look through those windows, you'll feel disoriented at first, like you're peeking through a keyhole at a busy ant colony. The thing is, those aren't ants, they're inmates. Because when the Ohio State Reformatory was abandoned, the state erected a new structure in its backyard, the Grafton Correctional Institution, and from the old reformatory chapel, you peer down onto its outdoor recreation hall. Tyrell, the kidnapper who bailed from Jennifer's car early in the abduction, the one who said, "Bro, there was so much blood back there," he's an inmate at Richland Correctional, even now in 2026. For all I know, I may have seen him milling about the yard, but I haven't met him. He never replied to my letter. But Nathan did. He wrote back with a straightforward note, "Yes, come talk to me." I'd never been inside an active prison before, So it took me a few weeks to navigate the labyrinth of protocols to get access. But after the authorization came through, I made the 5-hour trip from my town in Pennsylvania to Grafton Correctional Institute, 30 miles southwest of Cleveland. When I arrived, it turned out I'd been miscategorized as a personal friend instead of a journalist. After some head scratching, they credentialed me to enter the visitors area, but I wasn't allowed to carry a recording device or take notes. So I don't have audio of that first meeting, but I can tell you about it. It's a blustery, overcast morning in January 2024. I pass through the metal detector and main gate, then follow a correctional guard across the courtyard through a downpour of rain and into the visitors center. There, they check my ID again, and I sit down to wait. Just so you understand the scene, this is nothing like the jail where Jennifer described meeting her brother, with the old-style telephones and wire mesh glass separating the inmates and visitors. This is an open room that has the look and feel of a pediatric hospital, with cerulean blue walls and a floor-to-ceiling mural depicting marine life, whales, jellyfish, that sort of thing. I'm seated in a cluster of chairs among 10 or so inmates and about twice as many visitors, mostly women and children. A lot of the kids are playing board games and coloring with crayons on small tables. I've only been waiting about a minute when a figure approaches, and I get my first look at Nathan. He looks to be about 40, a bit stocky, with sloped shoulders and a jowly face, and he's wearing the standard issue blue V-neck prison uniform with a green t-shirt underneath. He extends a hand, shakes mine with a loose grip, and says, in a soft-spoken, gentle way, "This feels like Alice down the rabbit hole." Yeah, turns out, if this was an unusual day for me, it was a baffling one for him. No one, apart from personal acquaintances, had ever been to visit Nathan in prison since his conviction a dozen years ago. In fact, he tells me, almost in an embarrassed way, that he's sorry to be wasting my time because the story of his life is too uneventful, too short on drama, to be of interest to anyone. I introduce myself, give him a rundown of who I am and why I'm there. Without audio equipment, we agree to table any talk about the kidnapping and his family's history of drug use. But putting those things off limits gives us a chance to cover some other ground, including what his life has been like since his conviction. I'd imagine Nathan's life in prison as being a treadmill of monotony, but that isn't true at all. Nathan tells me he can't find enough hours in the day. In fact, the same guy who needed a lesson to start Jennifer's car is actually, as the assistant warden James Wesson would later tell me, one of the most trusted and respected inmates at Grafton. Nathan has worked in the prison library, connecting paroled inmates with employment options, halfway houses, community resources, that kind of thing. After that, he spent 7 years in the prison kennels, where he trained and cared for dogs that comprise canine police units. After being relocated to Grafton, his current prison, he was recruited into a culinary apprentice program, where he now works at least 50 hours a week, soliciting orders from staff and officers, ordering supplies, maintaining records, and serving as one of the 2 head cooks. He's weighing the option of entering a culinary training program near Cleveland when he's paroled, which has a less than 1% recidivism rate for former inmates, he tells me. If that doesn't pan out, Nathan has other options. His very devoted, very loyal sister has a job waiting for him in her small business. In fact, she keeps a room and bed set up for him in her house for when he gets out. In the meantime, she visits him once or twice a month at Grafton, always buying the overpriced pizza. Nathan says she'd probably come more often, but he has to be strip searched each time, which understandably dampens his enthusiasm for more frequent visits. Nathan does establish a few facts about his family. His mother, the person he was so close with, died back in 2018, which is why he feels free to talk about her past. Nathan's father is still alive. Until about 6 years ago, he used to visit Nathan in prison, but then he got a much younger girlfriend, and the visits petered out after that. Nathan says he doesn't mind. They were never close, and he wasn't a real father to him anyway. Maybe the strangest thing Nathan tells me is that he has a long-standing girlfriend. Grafton is a men's facility, so I ask him how that works. Turns out he met her through an online pen pal service. She's German, not like of German descent, but as in literally lives in Germany. I'm not sure what to make of this at first, but I can sort of see the appeal. It gives Nathan another anchor on the outside, something to attach his hopes to, even if the reality is they may never meet. I say something along these lines, and Nathan is like, "No, you don't understand. She's boarded a plane in Germany and flown to the US to visit me at least 15 times. Nathan asked me toward the end of our conversation how Miss Hurst is doing. That's how he refers to Jennifer. I tell him about the panic attacks, the years of therapy, the overpowered home security system she had installed. He says he's sorry to hear that Miss Hurst had been very kind to him. He takes a long pause, then tells me he thinks about what he did that night every single day, that it's the first thing he thinks about when he wakes up in the morning, and always will be to the day he dies, even when he's out of prison. Before I leave, Nathan asked me if Miss Hurst received the letter he sent to her many years ago. It was an expression of contrition, handled through a victims advocacy organization. I knew Jennifer hadn't ever received a letter from Nathan. In the weeks that followed, Jennifer and I tried to track down the note, but it never turned up. Some holes in this story never get filled. I returned to Grafton in May, now properly outfitted with an audio recorder. This time, the assistant warden leads me to a private conference room. I sit down facing a bank of windows that's overlooking a massive vegetable garden, where scores of uniformed prisoners in floppy hats are digging in the dirt. The scene, which honestly feels like a bucolic farming community ripped from a different century, plays out in my line of vision for the whole interview that follows. Nathan is led in a moment later, and we get right down to business. I ask him to tell me, in his own words, about his family and how he ended up in a prison in Grafton, Ohio. Like Jennifer, Nathan has warm memories of childhood. His parents were married, had stable jobs, a nice house, and looked after their 2 children, Nathan and his sister. Both parents worked. Nathan's mom was a licensed nurse practitioner. His father served as a typist in Germany during the Vietnam War, then built a decades-long career in the shipping and retrieving department for a company that builds turbines to push crude oil through pipelines.
Like, it was a pretty good family. Like, I would say middle class to upper middle class maybe. We were the only house in the neighborhood that had a pool, so all the kids would come over and play and everything.
Nathan's dad had grown up in Mount Vernon, Ohio, about 30 miles south of Mansfield, and his side of the family had deep roots there.
They're still there to this day. But yeah, it was a pretty average, nice home. I didn't experience any like abuse. Maybe it would be considered abuse now, getting whipped and everything. But maybe some domestic violence of them arguing, but nothing major. So I thought we had a pretty good childhood.
Still, beneath the surface, there were tensions. Nathan's parents were an interracial couple. She was white, he was black. And when they married across racial lines, his mom's side of the family severed ties.
And her family had money. Like the white side of my family, like they had money. A lot of them were racist, so they weren't really a part of our life. I think one of my great uncles owns a bunch of thoroughbred horses in Kentucky or something. I don't have a clue because I never met him.
The turning point in their lives happened when Nathan was about 10 years old. He and his sister were riding along with their mom as she did errands. They pulled into a parking spot of the local pharmacy.
Me and my sister were outside of a Farmore, and we were sitting in the car waiting for her. And I remember seeing her taken out in handcuffs and put in the back of a police car. And that was really my first interaction with police.
As a nurse, Nathan's mom had access to the physician's prescription notepad, which at that time didn't have electronic health record safeguards. She'd been forging prescriptions for Darvocet, an opioid pain reliever, probably for years. She'd end up taking a plea deal to serve 1.5 years in prison. She also lost her license to practice nursing. Nathan celebrated his 12th and 13th birthdays while his mom was incarcerated, and her absence had a profound effect on him. He says he went numb. His interest in school faltered and his grades tanked. Meanwhile, Nathan's dad coped with alcohol, not just drinking liquor himself, but pushing it on Nathan.
I turned 13, my dad got me and my friends drunk on my 13th birthday. So that was my first experience with alcohol due to him, because when she left, he pretty much turned into an alcoholic. He was drinking every night and gone all evening.
By this point, they were living in a small farming community called Fredericktown. But Fredericktown was a dry town, so Nathan's father would end up staying in Mount Vernon, where he could buy liquor, and Nathan and his sister were left alone in their empty house, sometimes without food. When Nathan's mom got out of prison, she divorced Nathan's father and started collecting child support, but she was broke and unemployed. The three of them ended up pinballing from rental to rental as they moved through a revolving door of evictions.
Yeah, we probably moved maybe 25 times before I was 20, I would say.
Nathan tells me his mom went to NA, Narcotics Anonymous, across the next few years, but it's not at first clear to me whether she stayed sober when she got out of prison. And just to clarify, so you saw her arrested,
Yeah.
but when she got out of prison, you kind of weren't aware that she was continuing to use after that?
No.
Okay.
No. Like I said, she never did pills around me. I seen pills. I remember she was on Darvocets back then. They were pink pills. I remember seeing them, but I never seen her abuse them. And she was still going to NA at that time.
Nathan says it's hard to pin down the timeline of when his mother began using narcotics, but he knows a few details. For one thing, some years before Nathan saw her get arrested at the pharmacy, doctors discovered a spinal tumor that ended up requiring multiple neck and back surgeries over a period of years. Not long after, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. But even after she was incarcerated for writing fake prescriptions, doctors kept prescribing these highly addictive pain medications.
When I got locked up, she was still on prescriptions. Every month, the doctors were still giving her 100 and something Percocets and 100 and something of these, 2 different kinds, like this for breakthrough pain and this for, continued pain. And so she was still getting prescriptions till the day I got locked up, which is crazy. Pain pills for her that the doctors were just shoving down her throat. It's like, this is just, in hindsight, I don't know how she could have got locked up. She was just always, every year being put on a different type of medication, an Ativan, a Xanax, Neurontin, all these different types of medicines, but they pass them out like Skittles, though.
So some of what caused her addiction was brought about just by bad luck. The misfortune of developing a tumor and the MS on top of that, and then the excruciating pain she had to contend with for years afterwards. And some of this was clearly caused by a broken healthcare system that pumped pain medication en masse to people who already had a history of addiction. But even apart from those two factors, Nathan's mom was dealing with other issues too that trace back to her family, the racist family that cast her out when she married a black man. Nathan mentions the incident at the start of our conversation.
And she also, in that whole time frame, she ended up getting raped down in Columbus, and I think that was part of the whole addiction thing.
And he brushes past this same incident again later.
You know, and she had a pretty rough life. Her uncles were raping her when she was a kid.
So I circle back to this and ask him to explain. When you say your uncles raped your mom?
Yeah, she said they tied her up to a tree, one of them, but I don't know who it is, you know.
They were never tried or convicted for that?
No. And I've never even met them, you know. I don't have a clue. And she tried to explain that was like the beginning of her struggles through life with that incident. And from there on, you know, with depression and everything. I don't know if she was diagnosed with bipolar or anything like that. I think it was just major depression and anxiety. I truly do, because she was always super depressed.
When Nathan calls her super depressed, he means that she was suicidal. By the time Nathan was 17, her addiction had escalated, along with acts of self-harm.
But yeah, I do think she got to the point eventually where she was hurting herself. You know, because me and my sister would come home multiple times to suicide notes, and she tried to kill herself a few times. That's why she ended up in the psych ward. It was always because she tried to kill herself or overdose. And then later in life, I think she was honestly like breaking bones to get pills. It was that bad.
At one point, Nathan was even arrested by police because his mom's injuries were so severe they just assumed she must have been assaulted.
I remember, I think I was 17 at this time. And I don't know, I came home from work from Value City, and found her at the bottom of the steps with a knife in her stomach. And I remember they put me in handcuffs and put me in the back of the police car because they just assumed that, you know, somebody had did this to her. And still to this day, I don't exactly know what happened, if she tried to kill herself or if she threw herself down the steps and the knife just jammed into her or whatever. It was one of them things where, like, I don't know if she was trying to kill herself or just trying to get pain pills at that point. Because there were times when, you know, the doctors would take her off and then she would do something to get put back on them, you know, so she wouldn't have to go to withdrawals. But that was one time. We found her multiple times, you know, half dead. She came close to dying a multitude of times.
Nathan did manage to get his GED by the age of 19 with the help of some homeschooling from his mom, but he was otherwise struggling to get on in life. His plan had always been to join the military, like his father and grandfather before him. But the binge drinking that he'd begun at age 13 had worsened. He'd drive to Mount Vernon on the weekends, get trashed, and then get picked up by police driving back to Mansfield. You got your first DUI around the age of 18?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was operating a motor vehicle while underage consumption is
Okay.
what they called it.
I see.
Yeah. So, I wrecked a car.
You hear me say first there because they just kept happening. Do you know how many DUIs you got?
4, I would say. Yeah, probably 4. So I know they had a law, like if you got 3 within a certain time period, it was considered a felony, and I was always like right outside that realm.
Still, Nathan was trying to sort out his life. He enrolled in classes at North Central State College to study electrical engineering, but he wasn't far along when he got the news. He was going to be a father. It was a messy situation. The mother of Nathan's child had a boyfriend who wasn't Nathan, and who wanted Nathan out of the picture. Nathan says the boyfriend shot up his car, slashed his tires, terrorized his family. It made fathering Mia, that's his daughter's name, all but impossible. Nathan paid his child support on time, but the truth was that neither he nor his ex were prepared to raise a child. So, Nathan's mom, even with her chronic pain and substance use issues and mental health setbacks, ended up stepping in and caring for Mia for the first 6 years of her life. Meanwhile, Nathan left retail work and began working punch presses at a place in Mansfield called Taylor Metal Products.
I worked my way up from operator to tow motor driver to die setter, and then I was trying to get ready to do an apprenticeship in the tool room. I worked real hard, like right up until I became addicted to drugs. Like I had my own house. It was on like 50 acres of farmland and 50 acres of woods. It was a rental, but it was nice. I had 2 cars and a dog. Like I was pretty content with my life at that point.
All in all, things were going well for Nathan. By this time, he'd risen to the challenge of being a father, because he'd had to. His mom was overdosing, self-harming. The mother of his child had disappeared down in Texas, so he was raising Mia on his own. But, out of sheer laziness, he never signed the paperwork to legally execute his custodial rights. That ended up being a costly mistake. Nathan got a call at work. Mia had locked herself in the bathroom at home. Her mother, flanked by police, was there to reclaim her.
So she came and took my daughter that day, and she was in Texas the next day. Down at Fort Hood, because she had married somebody else in the military. And that was essentially, for me, that was the point like where I knew like I was gonna probably. It's like people say like if they don't have your kid, they're gonna be dead or in jail. Well, that was definitely true for me.
Nathan became frantic, monomaniacally focused on getting back to his daughter. He took a second full-time job in another factory and was working 2 full-time shifts, 18 hours every day, sometimes clocking more than 80 hours a week. He was desperate for a way to make money fast, and he found one.
My buddy I worked with, he introduced me to Percocets, and not to use, but to sell, to get money so I didn't have to work my other job, because I worked with him at Taylor Metal Products. He was going down to Florida, flying down there and bringing them back up, and buying them for this and selling them for that, and I was starting to save up money.
This is just about 2 years out from the kidnapping. It turned out a huge number of his co-workers were addicts, so demand was ferocious. Within a year, though, Nathan began using Percocet himself. At the same time, his mom moved to Texas to be close to Mia, and it didn't go well.
So that's when my mom really spiraled out of control, like just straight, like that's when she came back from there, that's when I seen her smoking crack and just doing heroin, any type of drug she could get her hands on. Yes, when she came back, I would say she was probably 10 times worse than she was when she left, and she wasn't gone that long.
Nathan says his mom had some sort of run-in with the police in Texas. He doesn't know what exactly. And when she came back to Ohio, her addiction was all-consuming. Nathan had been using Percocet for a while, but up to this point, he was still functioning okay at work. As soon as his mom moved in, though, it was a cascade downward. He began missing work, burnt through his savings, then lost his car. The power company cut his electricity. Now, he and his mom were using together.
Because we were enabling each other. I mean, she was literally cooking crack. Like I said, I never even seen her snort a pill at this time. I knew she took drugs. I knew she was a drug addict. But when she came back, she was just blatant about it. She was crushing up her pills and snorting them, cooking crack on spoons. I never seen her shoot heroin up before, but odds are she was probably doing that too.
At this point, they were so desperate that they were chasing anything to get a high. Not just Percocet, but cocaine, morphine, any pain medication or anxiety drugs. Nathan's mom went out and robbed a Dollar General store at knife point. That's how reckless, how desperate they'd gotten. Then, about 3 months before the kidnapping, and after a raft of second chances he'd gotten from his employer, Nathan finally lost his job at Taylor Metals. Nathan went to pick up his last paycheck. When he got there, the owner, his longtime employer, Scott Taylor, pulled him aside, offered him help. Looking back, Nathan remembers this as a moment of incredible kindness, the last off-ramp that was offered to him. But he didn't take it, and his despair was so total that he felt suicidal himself.
But I remember I prayed to God, for God to kill me, let me wrap my car around a tree or something, because this is just, why, why.
This takes us up to the week of the kidnapping. Nathan was snorting heroin with his mom every day, and she egged him on to get money, any way he could. So he stewed on it for a couple days.
Well, I continued to get high for the next couple of days, and then I seen this movie that was had Bruce Willis in it. I think it was called Bandits, and it was like they commit this crime where they rob a bank manager, they break into his home and then take him to the bank, and then they get all this money, and so I came up with the idea to rob somebody.
The problem was, after watching this very mediocre comedy crime caper starring Bruce Willis, only one target came to mind, and that was the most decent man he knew, the one man who'd offered him real help, his employer, Scott Taylor. Nathan remembers flipping through the phone book, looking for the address, disgusted at himself. But he wasn't thinking clearly. In fact, the so-called plans he was coming up with were a haze of confusion. They sounded like the hijinks cooked up by Tom Sawyer in Huckleberry Finn.
I remember drawing out this fake map of a house that didn't even exist.
Nathan was in a delirium, but he forged ahead. He'd never owned a gun or even fired a gun, so he called up one of his mom's dealers, Derek Butler. Derek procured the 2 firearms and also lent some hired muscle, an accomplice, Tyrell, who was actually Derek's own nephew. The day of the burglary, Nathan binged hard.
We got together. I remember doing as many drugs as I could that day, drinking a whole bunch.
Do you know what drugs?
Broke. Crack.
Crack?
Yeah, crack, because that was what I had access to at that point. Heroin, because I couldn't find at that particular time the Percocets in the city were like $1 a milligram. They were super expensive and nobody had them. So what's the next best thing? Heroin. And that's what I was using for a few days prior to this.
Nathan and Tyrell started driving to the address, but got all turned around. Scott Taylor's house was just 15 minutes down the road, but Nathan felt like they were driving for hours. When they finally found the right house, they parked at the end of a long driveway. Both of them pulled on their hoodies, masks, and gloves, then grabbed their pistols. The house seemed still as they approached. They circled around to the back, where they found an open window. Tyrell used a utility knife to cut through the screen and climb through. The house was supposed to be empty. How they would have guessed this, Nathan doesn't say. But as soon as they were inside, they heard noises.
I remember, I think we heard Scott, and when he came around the corner, I don't think Tyrell, he didn't punch him. I think he smacked him.
You were both in the house at this point.
Yeah, we were both in the house, yep. We're in a bedroom, or maybe like an extra, maybe like a guest room or something, perhaps.
On the first floor?
Yeah, on the first floor.
Mm-hmm.
And so Scott came around the corner, I think he smacked him, and then he fell down, and he started screaming. He was running backwards or backpedaling backwards.
Nathan says Tyrell smacked Scott, but I already knew from my conversation with Jennifer it was much more violent than that. Tyrell pistol-whipped Scott's head, hard. I prompt Nathan again, and he's a little more explicit. He hit him on the head with a gun?
Yeah.
Okay.
He hit him on the head with a gun. He started bleeding.
Nathan corralled Scott into the kitchen and trained a gun on his head, as Scott tried to staunch the bleeding from his head wound with a towel. Scott was screaming, loudly. Nathan didn't know it at the time, but Scott was intentionally warning his wife upstairs. She'd heard the screams and dove into a closet, where she'd used her cell to call 911. About 5 minutes later, Tyrell came into the room where Joanne was hiding and rifled through a filing cabinet looking for cash. Eventually, he yanked open the door to the closet and saw her. Tyrell pulled her out, held a gun to her head, and screamed in her face, "Did you call the cops?" "No," she choked back, and he shoved her downstairs. Moments later, something changed. Nathan doesn't know if he heard sirens or saw flashes of emergency lights, but they bolted from the house, pell-mell through yards and bushes. It was frantic chaos. Thorns were tearing at their clothes and flesh, and as exhaustion set in, they dove into ravines and behind rocks for rest. After a while, they could hear canines barking in the distance on their trail. Then, after maybe 2 hours of harried sprinting and hiding, the woods opened into a wide meadow with ankle-high grass, where, even in the twilight, they could make out a figure, a woman walking her dog. Jennifer saw them too, and a faint smile flickered across her face as she thought, "It's so peaceful to come across deer at dusk." Nothing Nathan tells me really departs from what Jennifer told me after that. His memory is spotty, but he recognizes the absurdity of it all.
I remember going into her garage. I remember one thing I definitely remember is I wanted to make sure that she put her dog up. I don't know why that stands out, but I wanted to make sure that she had put her dog away.
So the dog was okay? Is that why? Or so that you would be safe? Or
No, yeah, just so she didn't lose her dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so
Right.
she didn't lose her dog, which is crazy because I'm essentially hijacking this lady, and I'm worried about making sure she puts her dog up.
Some of the moments that seemed absolutely pivotal for Jennifer didn't even register as big decisions for Nathan. Do you know why you insisted that Jennifer come with you?
I don't. I don't have a clue. But yeah, so I don't know. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. In hindsight, they were all just poor decisions. They were all horrible decisions, matter of fact. Should I left her there? Of course. Should I have not robbed Scott and Joanne? Of course.
Nathan recounts the same stops Jennifer told me about. They dropped off Tyrell, passed by police cars, got gas, scored drugs. I try to get a sense of whether anything Jennifer was saying, or not saying, changed his behavior, if all those strategic calculations she made had an impact. He remembers her saying something about her brother, Nathan says, but otherwise...
She was real compliant. She just sat there and she was just talking with me like a normal person. She never cried or anything. She was just in shock, the whole situation, and not knowing what was going to happen to her, whether she was going to live or die, or who knows what was going through her head. I'm sure that's what was going through her head.
When Nathan tells me this, it's pretty clear to me that he feels genuine regret over what Jennifer went through. He imagines the terror she must have felt, and how that terror must have stalked her for years after the abduction. But in the crucible of that evening, Nathan and Jennifer were mostly just unknowable voids to each other. I said at the opening that Nathan's story is about trying to help the people you love, and how sacrifices can curdle into tragedy. And I still think that's true on some level. Nathan was hell-bent on getting back to his daughter, on fulfilling his obligation as a parent, and that obsessive commitment pulled him into a maelstrom of desperation and addiction. Don't get me wrong, The choices Nathan made also had shades of selfishness. He took reckless shortcuts. He knowingly hurt people. But I don't think anyone can hear his story and think, with confidence, yeah, I would have wrested a good life from those circumstances. I have to keep reminding myself, I was pulling crawdads from the creek as a teenager. Nathan was pulling a knife from his mother's stomach. Does that make me a good person? Does it make him one? I still wrestle with these questions, but one thing I'm sure about is that I never would have understood the kidnapping if I hadn't traced these tributaries upstream to their source. But now it's time to see where they all flow, where they all empty into. Where did Nathan's choices ultimately lead on the night of the kidnapping? And what happened when Jennifer finally came face to face with Nathan's mother? That's next time on the final episode of Passenger Seat. This episode of Passenger Seat was written, reported, and produced by me, Tom Joudrey. Bryan Nichols assisted with music and sound design. A special thanks to Jennifer Hurst. Passenger Seat is a product of Middlemarch Productions.